Hey, T Sippers, I'm back. I'm gonna get this out the way. Okay, let's just go on into it. I just finished my other live. I'm gonna try to get in here with what happened with
Enhance your membership with the American Express
hold
Platinum
on.
Card and access over $3,500 in annual value. Get up to $400.
Let me see. I want to go to the arrival first, check that out, and then we're gonna go into some of the happenings today. This is the arrival of Putin. This is Putin arriving to China. Days after Trump, no deal. Let's see if Putin get a deal. Trump already mad. We just found out he was trying to push buttons. Middle East had to tell him no. This is crazy. As you come in, please hit the like button. Oh, way more people. Way more greeting. Oh, ooh, way more people. Did we even see them? Look at the black cars now. All of them hovering over him. Look at that. Trump didn't get all of that. I can tell you that now. Look at all these people hovering over him. He tried to offer him some flowers. Yeah, Trump pissed. If this what went on today, yeah, he pissed. That's why he was ready to put his hand on the red button. Oh yeah, I know Trump was pissed. Y'all hit the like button. Yeah, remember they only had a few little girls. Okay, let me go.
Over the last 75 years, over 10,000 chemicals have been introduced into our food supply. That is terrifying. If you
Oh, they over here cooking and stuff together. Oh yeah, Trump. Oh, he pissed. If he watching this, he pissed. Hold on. They eating together. Oh, Trump is pissed. He's smiling with him. He just.
Собака, не обращай внимания. И с ними.
Oh wow.
Вот. Тема.
Is his finger now?
Можно пельмени сделать, можно. Тема. Можно пельмени сделать, можно. Вот это.
Yeah, this is total different energy.
到天津了嘛，然后钱也不多，但是也要吃这个。还有豆腐脑和那个油饼、油条。很好。
Как цветы, как цветочек.
口不里就将来是普京总统啊。包的这个。
太好了。По-президентски.
能包上就特别棒。
Отлично.
待会儿把这个蒸出来看。
正
好66岁。
Большой
这
благополучие.
是一个很吉祥的数字，谢
Это
谢。
счастливая цифра. Спасибо.
Традиционные, в традиционном нашем стиле выполнено.
这是我们
Российском стиле.
非常精美的。
Называется
изящные изделия.
и называется она солнечный день. Как раз сегодня.
晴朗的天空，
寓意很好。
хорошее значение.
还有啊，最好的。
Это самый вкусный.
我也顺带着给你。
И у меня тоже для вас,每次来他们都是盛情招待。生日快乐！
再一次生气了。
Еще раз сердечно вам спасибо. Огромное спасибо.
Мой день рождения отмечается в Индонезии.
就是在巴厘岛那次，我们一起呢庆生。
Более выигрышном положении, потому что мы отмечали после рабочего дня, а здесь приходится в начале.
非相
但是
比
那一次呢，可能我还是破例喝的最多的一次葡萄。
В тот раз я думаю, что я больше всех раз выпил водки.
每一次都是干杯。
Никогда не выпил столько много водки.
Отметите глотком шампанского. Я желаю всем самого доброго. Всей нашей команды. 确是挺стран的，потому что ровно очень
来做这个饼，俄罗斯的薄饼。이거 좋아. У вас такой аккуратный блин получился.
我们这个饼特别漂亮啊，很远，好远。
这个圆一点，我这圆一点。Да, у меня кругленький.
Yeah, nah, we didn't see none of this with Trump. I know he pissed. He got played big time, y'all. Trump got played.
那个加黑鱼子酱。
He got played.
鱼子酱，那边不一样，这鱼的品种不一样。哎，这个，这什么酒啊？啊，это водочка.
Да, это не Великая Стена, но мы же в России.
这不是长城，因为我们是在俄罗斯，所以用一下白酒。
是вкусно.
真好吃。
Заказ питания, беспроводная сеть Wi-Fi на станциях и поездах. Все это позволяет
I know Trump is pissed.
карта Бандуры. В Лаосе началось совместное строительство железной дороги, соединяющей Стасерки. Достигнута договоренность между Китаем и Россией. По совместно пропущено более 8 тысяч контейнерных поездов, сообщих скоростных железных дорог. Китайские железные дороги готовы делиться с...
Русским крейсером с таким большим стажем. 120 лет кораблю.
120。
Okay, Lord, let me move on before I get caught up. Ooh, what he signing? What he signing? Oh, he made deals. Oh my God, he made it.
Do you know what your home is really worth? With Ownerly, check your home's value using the same tools.
Away from congressional oversight. And now we've got in breaking news, got some breaking news about Donald Trump's phony $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund.
Let's go.
Which he's created using a bad faith lawsuit that a federal judge challenged as being in bad faith and not a legitimate lawsuit, to then use his captured Department of Justice that he controls, his captured Treasury Department that he controls, his captured Internal Revenue Service that he controls, his captured private lawyers that he controls, to enter into a phony settlement to create a fund under his control away from congressional oversight. And now we've got, in breaking news, a new hero. We got a resignation of the top Treasury official, Brian Morrissey. He's the general counsel, or was, of the Treasury Department, handpicked by Donald Trump, had served in the first Trump administration of the Department of Justice, had been a partner in a law firm that I worked for called Sidley Austin out of Chicago, who had clerked for Clarence Thomas. And he apparently has some gravitas, some cojones.
Oh, let's go.
He's quit moments after the settlement was announced. In response to it, in protest to it, the timing suggests yes. I'm Michael Popak. You've got great timing. You're on the Midas Touch Network and Legal AF. Let's get down and update you about a pot shot
y'all not gonna hit the like
by
button?
Judge Williams as she departs the case. I don't think it went far enough, but certainly was her attempt to lay the groundwork for a future lawsuit. I want to talk about the memo given by Todd Blanche to the Treasury Department to set up the fund, and what I think is really strange about it, and the part where I think Judge Williams is not going to be happy, is that they continue to use, here's the first page of the settlement agreement, which they did not have to add the lawsuit. They could have just said it's a settlement, but they had a lawsuit, so they put the style or the caption of the case. I think this is, again, them using the federal court and the imprimatur of the federal process that she should do something about. I'll talk about that in a moment. Let's start from at the resignation. Brian Morrissey, not my politics, but certainly a fine lawyer. Worked in the Department of Justice in the first Trump administration. Clerked for Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Worked at Sidley in Austin. Was handpicked by Donald Trump to be the head of the Treasury Department's legal department, right? One that would sign off on this. And we know from other reporting that there was a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of head and hands about Donald Trump corrupting his DOJ, IRS, and Treasury Department to settle with him. That was the problem that Judge Williams in Miami federal court had. Where are the adversary parties here? You control everything. It's Trump v. Trump. Well, then you can't have a legitimate lawsuit. And if there's not a legitimate lawsuit, get out of my courtroom. She was about to toss the case. She ordered the Trump side to issue and submit briefs about how she even had jurisdiction, how this was a legitimate federal case. Because if this isn't an imminent real lawsuit, if it's just a piece of paper, then what are you settling? Then under the statutes that allow the Department of Justice to settle and compromise, they're inapplicable. That was her argument. But wouldn't you know it, just before they had to file the brief with her, and she had already gotten guidance from 3 outside lawyers that she asked for, they settle the case and file a notice of voluntary dismissal with prejudice in her courtroom. They don't attach the settlement agreement. They just say, we're out, Judge. You know, there's been no answer filed, and we don't need your permission.
How many times I have to ask y'all to hit the like button? Hit the like button. Double tap the face of the phone or hit the 3 dots at the top right. What are we doing? It's just real simple. It don't cost nothing. Double tap your phone or hit those 3 dots at the top right corner. It's like almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I shouldn't have to tell grown folk that.
And we're going to dismiss, which is true under Rule 41 with one caveat. There were a lot of protests internally against the settlement because it didn't pass the straight face test nor the legal test, including being, I'm sure, they consider that it violates the domestic or presidential emoluments clause. An emolument in the Constitution, based on the time, is anything of value, right? A gift, a bonus, a commission, anything above the president's salary that he gets, economic or non-economic, as from a state or from the United States. In this case, the United States violates the emolument clause. That's what the lawsuit that's coming out of this fact pattern is going to allege. So Brian Morrissey's like, I'm out. I don't want to be associated with that settlement fund for the anti-victim weaponization fund. And then I read the settlement agreement, which we'll post on Legal AF Substack for you to read. And it talks about, in the recitals, again, not telling the truth about the lawsuit that was filed in front of Judge Williams. It says there was a civil lawsuit that was filed on January 29th, 2026, that President Trump also submitted. Listen to this. Made up facts nobody ever heard about. Recital Section 2, Paragraph A. Counsel for plaintiffs, that's Trump's private counsel, have indicated that but for this settlement, they would intend to amend their complaint, including in order to likely add a putative class claim. How are you going to add a putative class claim to a suit that the judge is about to dismiss? Right? And they don't mention that the judge, by her orders, was about to dismiss this lawsuit. There's nothing to amend when your suit is filed in bad faith. Judge Williams and the federal court getting used again as a pawn. If a genie gave me wishes, I would use at least one of them to wish for my cat Chanel to live forever. But since
I'm sorry.
that the case has been closed. But they skipped the part about Judge Williams questioning the legitimacy of the case. And then, of course, we have the order. Let me read to you from, let's switch gears and go to Judge Williams, also in the last 24 hours. In her, and then it talks about that the case has been closed. But they skipped the part about Judge Williams questioning the legitimacy of the case. And then, of course, we have the order. Let me read to you from, let's switch gears and go to Judge Williams, also in the last 24 hours. In her order closing the case, here's the pot shot she takes. Now, I agree that she had no choice but to dismiss the case and close the case under Rule 41 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, just because of the tactics used by Trump gives him the right to dismiss. She still has inherent authority over the administration of justice in her courtroom. And if I were her, especially now having seen the settlement agreement, I would do an order to show cause. I would have done it before she issued her order. Maybe she amends her order and says, I've now seen the settlement agreement. I see you're using my case. I see you reference my case and the attempt to amend my case when you knew or should have known that I'm about to dismiss the case. I want all the lawyers in here. I want fact-finding, and go into a fact-finding order to show cause about whether sanctions should be issued. But here's her parting shot, which I think will help the plaintiffs against this settlement in a future federal lawsuit. I'm sure that will be filed this week. Because the notice does not reference any settlement or include a stipulation of settlement, says Judge Williams on the bottom of page 2, there is no settlement of record. Additionally, defendants of federal agencies represented by the Department of Justice, which has an independent obligation to uphold the public's strong interest in knowing about the conduct of its government and expenditures of its resources and the fair administration of justice, neither submitted any settlement documents nor filed any documents ensuring that a settlement was appropriate where there was an outstanding question as to whether an actual case or controversy existed. That's the ticket. That's the little bit of a stab there by the judge. That will be picked up, I'm sure, along with the outline of the framework of the lawsuit that was created by 93 members of Congress who yesterday filed an amicus brief request and their brief arguing violation of the emoluments clause, violation of all the statutes related to DOJ's ability to settle cases. That Judge Williams' comment ends up baked into a future lawsuit, I assure you. But I really wanted to focus on, not so much the direction. And we have, of course, the memo that's now come out from Todd Blanche.
If you pee when you sneeze, you have to start using this. This is a thigh master, but it's also a pelvic floor trainer. It sounds super 80s.
And the IRS chief financial officer and lawyers for Donald Trump, including one that operates out of a Mailbox USA in Boca Raton, Florida. Right. But I wanted to focus on Brian Morrissey, because there needs to be more Brian Morrisseys, and they got to do something before settlements come out, like become whistleblowers. So that's why the courage here is not as great as somebody like Erez Ruveni, who left the Department of Justice after they abused and continued to abuse Kilmer Abrego Garcia. And he came out with a 30-page whistleblower statement. We need that before, not after. But I appreciate Brian Morrissey's pangs of guilt, twinges of guilt that led him to depart the Trump administration, which is lawless and rogue. I'll continue to follow it here for Midas Touch and Legal AF. Come over to Legal AF YouTube channel, will you? Hit the subscribe button. You might think you're subscribed, but you're not. Hit that button. Help us continue to grow our pro-democracy channel over there. 12 new videos every day at the intersection of law and politics. See me tonight on the Intersection podcast, the Webby.
Full collapse. Hold on. My lights are not up, so I'm not trying to move and move fast. Let me hear him. Let's hear this.
You know, I've been watching the news the way most folks watch the weather, with a cup of coffee in one hand and a quiet curiosity about where this is all heading. And I want to talk to you today just for a few minutes, like we're sitting on the porch together, because something is happening right now that most people are treating like a distant thunderstorm. Interesting to watch, but somebody else's problem. And here's the way I look at it. That thunderstorm is already raining on your roof. You just haven't checked the ceiling yet. On May 11th of this year, President Trump rejected Iran's peace proposal and called the ceasefire on life support. Now, I'm not here to tell you who's right and who's wrong in that negotiation. I've never been very good at politics, and frankly, I've never tried to be. What I am good at, what I've spent 70 years doing, is watching how decisions get made, how incentives shape behavior, and how short-term choices compound into long-term consequences. And what I'm watching right now concerns me, not because of any political flag, because of arithmetic. Because Brent crude oil sat at $104 a barrel the day that rejection came down. And we'll come back to that number in a moment, because it matters more to your family's budget than anyone is telling you.
You do not have to buy 1,000 labels to look professional. At Inkwave, you can get as few as...
The important thing to understand is this. When you and I go to bed tonight, decisions are being made by people thousands of miles away who do not pay your grocery bill, do not fill your gas tank, and do not balance your checkbook. And over time, that gap between who decides and who pays, that's where the real story is. So pour yourself a coffee. Let's talk about what's actually happening, why it matters, and what a rational person ought to be thinking about. Not panicking about, thinking about. Because in my experience, calm thinking is the most underpriced asset in America. Now, let me lay out where we are, because you can't analyze a situation if you don't understand it. The war between Israel, the United States, and Iran began earlier this year. There was a ceasefire, fragile, but a ceasefire. Then over this past weekend, the two sides exchanged fire again. On Sunday evening, the president read Iran's counter-proposal and called it, in his own words, a piece of garbage. On Monday, he said the ceasefire was unbelievably weak. Iran, for its part, called the American demands unreasonable and excessive. Now, the U.S. proposal asked Iran to give up its 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, halt enrichment for at least 12 years, and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. In return, sanctions would lift gradually and frozen assets would be released. Iran
Wait a
said
minute, what
no.
I missed? I'm sorry, y'all.
On Monday, he said the ceasefire was unbelievably weak. Iran, for its part, called the American demands unreasonable and excessive. Now, the U.S. proposal asked Iran to give up its 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, halt enrichment for at least 12 years, and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. In return, sanctions would lift gradually and frozen assets would be released. Iran said no. Trump said no. And here we sit. Now, here's the way I look at it. The Strait of Hormuz is not a place on a map to most Americans, but about 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil consumed on this planet passes through that narrow waterway. If you owned a business and 1/5 of your inventory came through a single hallway and 2 men were arguing in that hallway with matches in their hands, you would not sleep well. You would be making contingency plans. You would be calling your insurance company. Most Americans are not making contingency plans because most Americans don't realize they own a stake in that hallway. But they do. Every time they fill up the car, every time they buy groceries that were trucked from a farm, every time they turn on the heat. The president is heading to China this week for a state visit, and the Iran situation will sit at the center of that conversation. Beijing buys a lot of oil from the Persian Gulf. So does Europe. So do we, indirectly, because oil is a global market. There is no such thing as a local oil price. And that, my friend, is the context. Let me give you some numbers, because in my line of work, the numbers tell you what the headlines often hide. Brent crude oil traded around $72 a barrel on February 27th of this year. By the peak of the conflict, it touched nearly $120. That's a move of more than 55% in a matter of weeks. In March alone, Brent rose 51%, one of the largest one-month moves in the history of oil markets. Today, after some back and forth, it sits around $104. Gasoline at the pump in many parts of America has crossed $4.50 a gallon. Now take a family, a perfectly ordinary American family that drives 20,000 miles a year, gets 25 miles to the gallon. That's 800 gallons of gasoline. A $1.50 increase per gallon, which is roughly what we've seen, is $1,200 a year gone, vanished. Not because they bought anything new, not because they made a bad decision, just because of what's happening in a waterway they've never seen. And gasoline is only the visible part. Diesel runs the trucks that bring food to your supermarket. Jet fuel runs the planes. Natural gas heats your home and powers 1/3 of America's electricity. Every one of those prices is connected to crude oil, directly or indirectly. Meanwhile, and this is the part that puzzles me, the S&P 500 hit an all-time intraday high on May 1st. Stocks at record levels. Oil up 55%. Markets behaving as if these two things can coexist comfortably forever. In my experience, they cannot. Energy is the bloodstream of an economy. You don't raise the cost of the bloodstream by 50% and have nothing else change. The body always responds. It just takes a little time. And that lag That quiet lag between cause and effect is where most investors and most families get caught flat-footed. Now I want to talk about something I've thought about my entire career: how decisions actually get made. In my experience, the worst capital allocation decisions in history were almost never made by stupid people. They were made by intelligent people, under pressure, with incomplete information, and very often with somebody else's money. That last part is the dangerous one. When you negotiate a business deal, and I've negotiated a few, there's a discipline to walking away. You walk away when the alternative is genuinely better than the deal on the table. You don't walk away because you're frustrated. You don't walk away because the other side annoyed you. You walk away because you have done the calculation and the math tells you the deal in front of you is worse than no deal at all. Here's the way I look at this rejection. I'm not telling you it was wrong. I genuinely don't know all the classified intelligence that went into that decision, and neither does anyone else outside that room. What I am asking, and what I'd ask of any management team I was evaluating, is whether the framework producing that decision is sound. Because a good decision isn't measured by the outcome. It's measured by the quality of the reasoning at the time it was made. If you reject a peace proposal because it genuinely doesn't protect American interests, that's one thing. If you reject it because 4 days felt too long to wait, or because the document didn't read the way you wanted, that's something else entirely. And in business, I've seen both kinds of no. One kind builds a great company over 50 years. The other kind blows up a perfectly good company in 18 months. The difference, almost always, is whether the decision maker is thinking about the next quarter or the next quarter century. And that brings me to the most important question of all. Who exactly benefits from how this plays out? Because that's where the incentives start to matter. My partner Charlie Munger used to say, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." I've quoted him on that for 60 years, and I've never found an exception. So let's apply Charlie's rule to what's in front of us. Who benefits from this conflict continuing? Oil producers benefit. When Brent goes from $72 to $104, the producers in the Gulf, in Texas, in Russia, they're collecting a windfall they didn't earn through efficiency or innovation. They earned it through someone else's misfortune. Defense contractors benefit. Their order books are full for years. Their share prices reflect it. Politicians on both sides of the negotiation benefit from looking tough. Toughness polls well. Compromise does not. The people leading Iran benefit from a foreign enemy that distracts from their own troubles at home. Now ask yourself the harder question. Who pays? The American family at the pump pays. The retiree on a fixed income pays. The small business owner watching her electricity bill pays. The young couple trying to buy their first house pays.
Chris.
Because energy costs feed into inflation. And inflation keeps interest rates high. And high rates keep mortgages out of reach. None of these people are in the negotiating room. None of them have a vote on whether the ceasefire holds. And here's the part that troubles me as a student of human behavior. The decision makers and the bill payers are entirely different people. That is the most dangerous arrangement in any organization. Business, government, family, you name it. When the person making the choice doesn't feel the cost of the choice gets made carelessly. Not maliciously, carelessly. And carelessness, over time, is more expensive than malice. Because malice, you can prepare for. Carelessness blindsides you.
Right.
So when I look at this situation, I'm not asking who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. I'm asking, are the incentives of the people in that room aligned with the well-being of the people who will pay the bill? Now let's talk about something that is, in my opinion, the single most powerful force in finance and the single most underestimated force in everyday life, compounding. Most people understand compounding.
If you ever wanted to start your own clothing brand, but you didn't want to buy inventory,
when it works in their favor. $1 saved at a reasonable return becomes $10 over 30 years. What they forget is that compounding works in reverse too. A 50-cent rise in gasoline isn't a 50-cent problem. It's a tax that quietly multiplies through every product on every shelf in every store. The trucker pays more to deliver the bread. The bakery pays more to bake it. The grocery store pays more to refrigerate it. By the time that loaf reaches your kitchen table, the 50 cents has become $1.50, paid by you with no one ever sending you the bill in writing. Now do that across every product in your life, across every month, across every year. That's what an energy shock actually does. And here's the part that worries me. Inflation, once it gets embedded in an economy, is extraordinarily difficult to remove. The Federal Reserve spent 2 years and brought us within a whisker of recession, trying to wring the last bout of inflation out of the system. They were just about finished, and now we're potentially looking at another wave. Not because anyone in Washington failed at economic policy, but because of a foreign policy decision that hits the same pressure point. CNBC quoted an energy expert recently who called the market mood misplaced euphoria, warning that investors are sleepwalking into a recession. Stocks at all-time highs, while oil is up 55%. In 60 years of watching markets, that combination almost always ends one way. The markets eventually figure out what the rest of the economy offers, and the longer it takes for that realization to arrive, the more violently it tends to arrive. The time of maximum complacency, in my experience, is almost always the time of maximum risk. So where does all this end? I want to walk you through 3 scenarios, not because I can predict the future. Nobody can.
It's the end
Anyone
game.
who tells you they can is selling you something. But a disciplined person prepares for ranges of outcomes, not single forecasts. The first scenario is de-escalation. Cooler heads prevail. A modified deal gets signed. Oil drifts back toward $80. Markets celebrate. Headlines move on. And within 6 months, most of America forgets this happened. That's the best case. I don't think it's the most likely case, but it's possible. The second scenario, and this is the one I'd assign the highest probability to, is a frozen conflict. No peace, no full-scale war. A permanent risk premium baked into every barrel of oil. Oil settles at $95 or $100 and stays there. Inflation stays sticky. The Fed can't cut rates the way the economy needs. Mortgages stay expensive. Credit cards stay punishing. Household savings get slowly drained, not in one dramatic event, but year by year, like water dripping through a roof. Most people won't even notice it happening until they look back 5 years from now and wonder where the money went. The third scenario is full escalation. The Strait of Hormuz closes meaningfully. Oil tests $150 or higher. Gasoline crosses $6 a gallon. Recession follows. Unemployment rises. The stock market gives back 2 or 3 years of gains in a matter of weeks. I am not predicting this. I am telling you it is possible, and that the people in charge have not, in my view, taken sufficient steps to make it impossible. Now, I don't share these scenarios to frighten you. Fear is a terrible investment advisor. I share them because the question every rational person should be asking right now is not which one will happen. The question is, which of these am I prepared for? Because preparation, unlike prediction, is something you can actually control. So let me leave you with what I really believe after all these years. You cannot vote on what happens in Tehran. You cannot pick up the phone and call the president. You cannot rewrite the incentives of the people in that negotiating room. Those things are outside your circle of control. And one of the most important disciplines in life, in investing, in business, in raising a family, is to know the difference between what you can control and what you cannot. But here's what you can do. You can live below your means. You can hold a margin of safety in your finances. A little extra cash, a little less debt, a little more patience. You can own productive assets, a piece of a good business, your own skills, a home you can actually afford. You can avoid the great destroyer of household wealth, which is panic. Panic at the bottom, euphoria at the top. That's how ordinary people transfer their savings to people who don't panic. Remember that $104 a barrel I mentioned at the beginning? It's not just a number on a screen. It's a quiet message from the world to your household, telling you that the cost of complacency is rising. The headlines will scream, the markets will swing, the politicians will posture. Through all of it, the question is not whether the world is uncertain. The world has always been uncertain. The question is whether you are prepared to act rationally while everyone around you acts emotionally. In the long run, that single discipline, calm thinking when others are losing their heads, is worth more than any stock tip, any forecast, any prediction anyone could ever give you. The world will always provide reasons to be afraid. Always. What separates the people who get drained from the people who endure isn't intelligence, and it isn't luck. It's discipline. And discipline, unlike oil prices, is one thing nobody in Washington or Tehran can take away from you. Take care of yourself, and take care.
Okay, I got one more. Y'all not hitting my like button. So I'm going to do one more and then I'm out. Yeah, I'm out. You don't appreciate me, I don't appreciate you. You appreciate me, I appreciate you. Now, what is Buffett? Hold on. Hold on. Trump Republicans just lost the Senate. Oh, let me hear this.
Democratic Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock of Georgia.
Senator Warnock, thank you for joining us, and you also participated in our CAP Ideas Conference that we did earlier
twice today. I mean, it's my lucky day.
Well, ours as well, sir, given what's happening in Georgia. Record turnout in Georgia. How are you feeling about specifically this state Supreme Court race? And, you want to make any predictions about the Democratic side of the governor's race? We'll take them at this table.
Punditry is not what I do. But look, the massive turnout that we're seeing, the historic turnout, that's good news. And quite frankly, it's the answer to, or part of the answer to what we're seeing with this voter suppression, with this awful decision, the gerrymanders that are happening all across the South. Part of the answer to that is massive turnout. The gerrymandering is based on predictions about turnout based on previous races. We've got to undermine that math, and I think we've got some real opportunities I think the Republicans may have overreached here. And what you're witnessing is a kind of backlash. The voters are standing up. They're saying you will not silence our voice.
You know, they changed the rules, Alicia, in Georgia. The governor did. So the Democratic counties, the ballots don't say if the candidate is Democrat or Republican.
This gerrymander, what's at stake for your constituents?
So what was that?
What is at stake for your constituents?
In terms of gerrymandering?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, look, we're seeing a massive, devastating assault on voting rights. It's hard to overstate it. I mean, we got Section 2 with this gerrymandering. But prior to that, the legacy of the Roberts Court, in a real sense, is the dismantling of our electoral system. The Supreme Court has done a lot of damage. This Roberts Court, Section 2 in 2013, Section 5, Citizens United, all of these things. We're not just talking about black voters. We're talking about working class voters, ordinary people, either through suppression or gerrymandering, which says that even when you show up, it won't mean as much. In a real sense, they're setting fire to the democracy, and the Supreme Court is pouring fuel on that fire, and we have to stand up in this moment. I'm proud of all that we did when I first entered the Senate. It was the 117th Congress. We passed a lot of legislation. We cut child poverty by 40% for 6 months. We did infrastructure. We did, clean energy, the biggest clean energy bill in human history. Whole lot of good coming out of the pandemic. I have to tell you, looking at what's happening to our democracy right now, it was a mistake not to take voting rights first, to get John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act over the finish line. I'm proud of all that work we did. If I could, I'd trade all of that for the democracy, for the people's
Because
voices.
at the end of the day, if you can't vote, none of the policy matters.
Yes, but it sounds like you're endorsing getting rid of the filibuster. I just want to, that's the point.
Yeah, but you got to get the Senate to do that.
Yeah, well, we had every Democrat on that bill, on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement bill. It passed the House. At the end of the day, it was literally 2 senators, neither of whom is no longer is in the Senate now. And I think the caucus is on board. If we are so fortunate that the people will put us back into power, we owe it to the people to give them their voice. That's basic. It's foundational.
Yeah, I've been
And
back
no
an hour.
arcane Senate procedural rule should block people's ability to be heard in their democracy.
You talk about the caucus, the Democratic caucus for sure, but then there's also the Congressional Black Caucus, which, going back to what you were saying about they're putting a lot of gasoline on the flames. Well, a lot of members of the CBC could be burned in this.
Yeah.
You've got a potential crisis, as noted in Politico this November. Upward of 19 members of the caucus, about 1/3 of its ranks, are at risk of losing their seats. A worst-case scenario could look like the complete erasure of black representation across the South, according to 10 CBC members who spoke with Playbook. It's a generational moment, CBC lawmakers compare to the Reconstruction era and Civil Rights Movement, and is testing how far the caucus will be willing to go to preserve their political might. Senator, we're talking about a Congress of the United States that could look the way it did in 1954, in 1945 in the South, where you've got a handful of black folk who are left over, whose state legislatures, I guarantee you, will redistrict their behinds out of office if they...
Democrat of Massachusetts is joining me now and surveying all of this.
Lizzie
what
out.
do you think about this
Lizzie
fundamental
Borden
dynamic
out.
that we now have of Trump's grip on the Republican Party, sort of arguably stronger even maybe than it's ever been, grip on the country weaker, and what that means for what happens?
So it's a tighter and tighter hold on a smaller and smaller group.
Yeah, yes.
So, but that was really the point. I've heard the commentators say, and the people decided they didn't want to support Massie. No.
Right.
The people who showed up at a Republican primary decided they didn't want him to be their standard bearer. You know, if it's been an open, anybody votes. If this had been a general, I don't know exactly how that goes.
Right.
But I think this is the part. It's interesting to watch, and to watch what the dynamic will be on Republicans who said, man, I'm not crossing that guy. on the elected Republicans. We know who they belong to. But the reality is, we're 5 months out, we're going to have a general election, and boy, is that going to start shaking things.
So there's a bunch of cross pressure. I mean, right now we're already seeing the fallout in the Senate today.
Yeah.
Right? In a few different ways. I want to talk. One way was there was a war power resolution today. And for the first time, Democrats' party line, except for John Fetterman, have been voting for it. Republicans have been voting against it, except for Rand Paul. Those two have been switching. Today, Bill Cassidy, fresh off that loss on Saturday, crossed the line and voted with you and your colleagues to put it over the hump, which means it will now call a vote, is how I understand the procedure. What do you make of that development, and also what it portends for this Senate for the next 4 or 5
Well, could you say more clearly that if I'd been voting my conscience all along, I would not have been voting with Donald Trump?
Talk about a confession. I mean, it's really wild.
It's just like a moment of just now we can see what's really going on. And so you look at all the other guys who are still voting in line with Donald Trump, who watch these election victories, and look, there's no voter who's going to be fooled after today, right? Is there anybody left who thinks that there is an elected Republican who is actually voting his conscience, doing what he thinks is best for all of the people of his district? How does he stand up in front of the electorate for the next 5.5 months as he faces the general electorate and say, you know what matters most to me? And with a straight face says, you, rather than pleasing Donald Trump.
Well, and I think there's a strange kind of coincidence of interest here, which is that both Donald Trump and I would argue the Democratic Party probably want it to be the case that voters understand that Donald Trump is the Republican Party and the Republican Party is Donald Trump.
Well,
I mean, at this point, right?
I mean, that's reality. We'd like people to understand reality. But here's the thing. What Democrats will do now and are doing already is they are both going after Donald Trump. Remember, the man who said, what would he do? He would lower costs on day one. And where are we on costs? Cost of groceries is up, cost of gasoline is up, cost of healthcare is up, cost of utilities is up, cost of housing is up. And he told us he would keep us safe and stay out of wars. And you can do your own count on how many he's in, but what I know he's
might be
spending,
another one in Cuba, who knows?
That's right, $1 billion a day to kill people halfway around the world, and still can't explain how that helps one single family here in America. So we're going to stay on that, but here's the other half. We're also going to be making the affirmative case. And that's not just he sucks.
Right.
Our case is going to be, here are the things that we'll lay out that we will commit to get done that will affect your family, that will lower your costs. I think that's going to be the key.
I want to talk about that contrast, but I want to stay on for a second on the way that he is using taxpayer money and pushing them. I mean, because now you've got this I think this ballroom thing is really wild, right? I mean, originally it was, I'm raising private funds. Now it's, I must have $1 billion. He's monomaniacally obsessed with it. Over the weekend, the Senate parliamentarian, for somewhat complicated reasons, stripped out the ballroom funding out of the bill. They want to pass on a party line vote to begin with, right? They're not even, they're not consulting you. There's no negotiation on this. And Trump is so obsessed with this. I mean, it's all he talks about, really. He did an event today about it. He calls up Thune, Senate Majority Leader, to basically say you should fire the parliamentarian. And he wants to get this through. But this just strikes me, I mean, when you're talking about this contrast of, like, what they stand for, like, they're spending $1 billion in the guy's ballroom as people's groceries, as all their costs explode. It is an opportunity to be like, well, here's what we would do with money.
Exactly, because that really is the heart of it. Donald Trump has now said, with the cameras running, nah, we can't do childcare, right? We can't do that because we got this war to fight halfway around the world.
Yeah, he literally said that. That's not I want to say that's not a gross mischaracterization.
That's right.
Explicitly what he said.
Literally said it.
Yeah.
He spends hours, right, online doing memes about the war or about Donald Trump in a triumphal arch or in a made-up AI thing where he's floating in the reflecting pool. He spends hours on this. He spends energy on this. He talks about the ballroom. And where is he on your groceries? Where is he on the fact that your utilities are up 67%?
He said he don't care about the economic finances.
On the ways that his own policies, his tariff policy, his energy policy, his healthcare policy, and his war.
Trump, in picking Paxton, has put his Senate majority at risk, as have his extreme candidates elsewhere for a couple reasons. One, Raphael Warnock, excellent candidate, right? One of the best senators, I feel. I think he's going to run for president someday, and someday might be 2028, but it might be after that. Who knows? But I do think he has presidential potential. Let me know in the comments if you agree. I trust many of you do. But the point is, one of the reasons Raphael Warnock is in the Senate is because Georgia, a tough state for Democrats, was made much easier by Donald Trump picking ridiculous candidates like Herschel Walker. If a Brian Kemp-style candidate ran against Warnock, he might have lost. Maybe not, but he might have. It's certainly possible, right? And so, Raphael Warnock being on the news as a sitting U.S. senator is an eternal reminder of Donald Trump's strategy failing. But it's also about the broader national environment. See, here's what Republicans don't want you to know. Do you notice how Republicans try to defeat left-wing Democrats in primaries? They'll spend millions of dollars to try to defeat AOC and Democrats like her. It's because they actually fear left-wing Democrats being popular nationally. Moderate Democrats want to tell you that left-wing Democrats hurt the brand. If that was true, Republicans wouldn't spend money trying to stop AOC. They would spend money trying to give her a bigger microphone to embarrass the national Democrats. But see, Democrats do understand that MAGA is an embarrassment. And Democrats have at times, and this is controversial, funded Republican candidates that are more extreme to get a more favorable general election matchup. To have the MAGA candidate win the primary to make the Republicans weaker in the election. And also nationwide, because here's the dirty little secret. When you're talking about the Senate especially, maybe even the House, but especially the Senate, there is no such thing as a statewide race anymore. Every Senate election is national. Yes, the votes happen within one state, but donor amounts are done nationally, right? You win the donor race by getting national support. And the national narratives play a role, and a particularly bad, unpopular, ineffective Senate candidate can hurt you in other races. I know in the last election that when people saw candidates, the last midterms, like Carrie Lake, they voted Democrat in other states because they said, with a woman like that in the GOP, even if she's not in my...
Best lawyers out there on TV, explains everything in real term ways. So look forward to watching
He's
it.
just the best. We just did one of those big 92nd Street Y events in New York, and a packed house for Andrew Weissman, hanging on every word in that audience. The book, again, Liar's Kingdom, Andrew Weissman, get it right now. It's just a great one.
It's a good one. I'm going to go read it. It's on sale now, right?
Okay.
People can go buy it? Good. All right.
Get it right now. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. Well, the trick question for most politicians, and especially now for Republican politicians, is what would you not do to get reelected? And sadly, most politicians don't have an answer to that question. In fact, they don't even understand the question because they would do anything. They would say anything. And that is certainly true of Trump-supporting Republicans who used to be opposed to tariffs, but now support Donald Trump's tariffs even though they are illegal and unconstitutional. That is true of Republicans who used to support serious prison sentences for people convicted of violent crime, but now support Trump pardons and Trump cash for every violent criminal who attacked the Capitol on January 6th to try to overturn a presidential election for Donald Trump, including many of them whose publicly declared intent in the attack at the time was to assassinate the Vice President of the United States, to hang Mike Pence. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie found something that he would not do to get reelected. He would not try to help Donald Trump keep the Epstein files hidden inside the Trump Justice Department. And so Thomas Massie lost his reelection campaign tonight in Kentucky by 10 points in a Republican primary where Donald Trump supported Thomas Massie's opponent only because Thomas Massie, along with Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna, did everything he possibly could do to successfully force the release of the Epstein files by law. That was his crime against Donald Trump. And 45% of Republicans in Thomas Massie's district sided with Thomas Massie in that election against Donald Trump. Thomas Massie knew that trying to get the Epstein files released would provoke vengeance from Donald Trump. Thomas Massie, like every other Republican member of the House and Senate, had every right to believe that most of his voters are still in the grip of Donald Trump. But helping Donald Trump hide the Epstein files was something that Thomas Massie just could not do, even though he knew that crossing Donald Trump could lose his reelection. We don't see this very often in our politics anymore. A politician knowingly taking the chance of defeat in reelection because there's something that he just could not do. In this case, something he couldn't do for Donald Trump. And now Donald Trump is testing Republicans in the House and Senate once again by creating what Senator Ron Wyden calls, quote, the most brazen theft and abuse of taxpayer dollars by any president in American history. And today, Donald Trump's acting attorney general refused to promise that none of the money that the attorney general will award to secret recipients of a new secret fund that Donald Trump's Treasury will supply to Donald Trump's Justice Department will go to Andrew Paul Johnson. Donald Trump's acting attorney general, who is Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyer, was asked if he would give money to Andrew Paul Johnson today, and he refused to answer. Donald Trump pardoned Andrew Paul Johnson and let him out of prison, where he was serving time for his violent participation in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And Andrew Paul Johnson, as soon as he got out of prison, publicly thanked Donald Trump and then immediately went back to sexually abusing children.
Yes.
Andrew Paul Johnson abused two children, a boy and a girl, aged 10 and 11, before he went to prison for his crimes on January 6th.
Oh, wow.
And then he immediately went back to sexually abusing those same two children again as soon as Donald Trump let him out of prison. And now
Imagine
Andrew Paul
those
Johnson
babies.
has been sentenced to life in prison after a Florida jury found him. Donald Trump let him out of prison. And now Andrew Paul Johnson has been sentenced before he went to prison for his crimes on January 6th. And then he immediately went back to sexually abusing those same two children again as soon as Donald Trump let him out of prison. And now Andrew Paul Johnson has been sentenced to life in prison after a Florida jury found him guilty of 5 criminal charges, including molestation, lewd and lascivious exhibition, and transmission of material harmful to a minor. And today, Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's acting attorney general, said, in effect, it's possible that Andrew Paul Johnson will now get money from Donald Trump's secret fund as a reward for attacking the Capitol on January 6th.
Let me go back to this slush fund, because there's also an individual who, after being pardoned by the president, went on to molest 2 children. And that person actually tried to buy the silence of these children by saying that he would pay them some of the funds that he was hoping to get. from your slush fund. Can you commit to making the rules so that that person is not eligible for a payout under this fund?
Well, you're obviously lying in your question because there's no way that this person committed to that. But the slush fund, as you call it, which is not, didn't exist.
I'm sure,
but I can commit.
Mr. Attorney General, don't ever do that again. I am reporting what he said. He said on the expectation that he hoped to get some of the funds from a payout. He's been
you said from the slush fund, Senator, and that didn't exist when he said that.
This is the fund that the president and all of you have been telegraphing all along that you're going to use to help the president's friends.
Can you point to a single telegraph?
I have a last question.
What telegraph did
I have a last question for you. Do you know that it is a criminal offense to lie to
fund for criminals was announced yesterday. Many of those criminals, rightly, it turns out, expected this money from Donald Trump. We will never know, according to the rules of the commission set up by Donald Trump and his acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, who actually applies for and receives any of the money from that fund. There is no limit on who can receive that money. And so we may never know if the child molester who Donald Trump pardoned, Andrew Paul Johnson, gets any money from Donald Trump's commission. Donald Trump, of course, didn't know he was pardoning a child molester when he pardoned Andrew Paul Johnson. And that means that Donald Trump will not know if he is giving money to child molesters through his fund, because that's not the kind of homework Donald Trump does. Donald Trump said today that he's just too busy to explain. He thereby became the first president in history who claimed to be too busy to explain the war that he is waging. Every wartime president prior to Donald Trump has been much busier in their workday and their weekends than Donald Trump, but none negotiate some kind of agreement with Iran to end his war. Donald Trump first started promising those 2 or 3 days primarily to the stock market in the first week of his war. And now, in the 80th day of his war, he's still promising the 2 or 3 days. And what you can know for sure by now is that we are not 2 or 3 days away from the end of Donald Trump's war. And Iran obviously knows that, since Donald Trump has been telling that lie about Iran being ready within 2 or 3 days to agree to a deal with Donald Trump. It's Iran, after all, that Donald Trump is actually lying about when he uses that magic 2 or 3 days formulation. Imagine the Iranian regime sitting there listening to Donald Trump every week saying that they are going to come around in 2 or 3 days. Donald Trump said today that if he had time to explain it to people, everyone would support his war.
Everyone tells me it's unpopular, but I think it's very popular. When they hear that it's having to do with nuclear weapons, weapons that could take out Los Angeles, could take out major cities very quick. When they hear that, you know, when they're explaining, I'll tell you what, when we explain it to people, I don't really have enough time to explain to people. I'm too busy getting it done.
Of course, Iran does not have those weapons and actually put in writing in an agreement with President Obama that they would never pursue such weapons. Now, here's Donald Trump today not having enough time to explain his war to the American people.
I'm doing a job on the reflecting leg for a fraction of what they paid. Now I've upgraded it I got so into it, I've upgraded it like you wouldn't believe. I'm doing all the walkways outside. I'm doing it properly. But it's a much bigger job. But you see it's happening now. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be waterproof. It's going to be reflecting again.
Yeah. He said the pool is going to be waterproof. Here's more of Donald Trump not having enough time to explain his war to the American people today.
This is a gift to the United States of America. And more than a gift, it's going to be one of the most beautiful buildings that's ever been built in the country or in Washington.
Well, he acting like he ain't going,
So here's the other
he ain't
facade
gonna be put out.
here. And again, this is taken, these great classical buildings, they're taken out of different parts of the world from very glamorous times. This is Rome. They like the flat roof. Greece likes they call it the
So
triangles.
the building is for
You see that?
the foreign
This
countries.
is a porch that looks out over the city. Also, it's
Oh,
developed
wow.
in such a way that we can have military there. But the entire roof is developed for military. They're very high. They're higher than just about anything else.
Wow.
They have a 360-degree vision
The
of
CIA.
Washington, D.C. They have a massive drone
The military
capacity.
that's
Not only
doing the
is it
trafficking.
drone-proof. If a drone hits it, it bounces off. It won't have any impact.
Is that the same military?
No time to explain his war. Today, Donald Trump lost an important vote in the United States Senate on his war. The vote was 50-47 in favor of advancing a war powers resolution to limit Donald Trump's war in Iran. And joining the vote against Donald Trump's war was Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, who just lost his re-election primary in Louisiana last weekend. Senator Cassidy's crime against Donald Trump was voting to convict Donald Trump in his second impeachment trial in the United States Senate, where 57 senators, including 7 Republicans, voted to convict Donald Trump and bar him from ever running for president again for his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The attack that Donald Trump did nothing to stop while the attack was going on. Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's indictment of Donald Trump for his attempt to overthrow the presidential election accused Donald Trump of a conspiracy against the United States of America. A conspiracy that included Donald Trump's encouragement of the attack on the Capitol, and a conspiracy which now includes a plan for massive payoffs to the people who attacked the Capitol for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
The man who's now too busy to explain anything.
What do you want to talk about?
Leading off
The
our
White
coverage
House
tonight is Democratic
and
Senator
and
Gary
Pence.
Peters of Michigan. He's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, is on the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee, and was part of the questioning of Todd Blanche today. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. What can be done by Congress about this situation with this fund that you were part of the questioning of the acting Attorney General today?
Well, Lawrence, you're absolutely right as you opened up this program. This is just unbelievable that we are in this situation. It is just, I just can't wrap my arms around the fact that we've just seen basically a giveaway of money to folks that are basically political supporters of Donald Trump, that he puts in place an acting attorney general who is basically his private attorney, then goes to the private attorney and then cuts a deal for nearly $2 billion, basically corruption at the highest level. Certainly Congress has to do something. We've got to try to figure out where this money is coming from, how it's going to be used, what sort of things that we can do. But, you know, Lawrence, as we've talked about before on this program, we're also going to need Republicans that are also outraged by this outrageous corruption that we are seeing play out right in front of our eyes right now. But we have a lot of questions to ask. We asked questions today in the hearing. It was clear that this administration doesn't really want to say who's going to get this money, although we know it's folks, as you mentioned. There were probably...
Oh, I'm sorry. I got it. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get ready for bed. Am I on it?
Best lawyers out there on TV, explains everything real.
Doing a job on the reflecting legs. Washington, D.C.
The man. Corruption that we are seeing play out right in front of our eyes right now. But we have a lot of questions to ask. We asked questions today in the hearing.
Thank you,
It was
Richard.
clear that this administration doesn't really want to say who's going to get this money, although we know it's folks, as you mentioned. There were probably...
What keep happening? I don't know what this is, but I'm gonna try this one more time.
Best lawyers out there on TV, explains everything in real term ways. So look forward to watching it.
But when it comes to an actual vote, they won't actually carry through. But we'll see. We've got to keep bringing this to the attention by what you're seeing right here. So I certainly appreciate the comments made by Leader Thune. And, you know, Bill Cassidy, I've always known as a very straight shooter. That may be his downfall in this Republican Party, that he is a man of integrity. But the fact that more Republicans are starting to speak out against it is encouraging. But I've also seen that in the past where they talk, but when it comes to an actual vote, they won't actually carry through. But we'll see. We've got to keep bringing this to the attention of the American people because it's pretty clear and obvious that this is outrageous corruption.
Well, there was an actual vote on Donald Trump's war today in the United States Senate, and Donald Trump lost that vote with Senator Cassidy, again, in this situation, crossing the aisle, now finally fed up with Donald Trump's war.
Yes, no, it was an important vote. Now, there were some members that weren't there today, so we have to have another vote. This is just the first in a series. But it's clear, as you mentioned, Donald Trump does not want to talk about this war because he has failed in his objectives here. And to think that we have a United States president that is presiding over a war, who has caused tremendous chaos in the world economy, a president that is, because of his actions in this war of choice, is now raising the cost of living for Americans, fuel prices, grocery prices. People are hurting, and then he actually dismisses what people are feeling by saying this is just peanuts, it shouldn't affect them. He has completely lost touch with the challenges that American families are facing right now in our economy. And the image you showed just before I got on this segment of a president, when Americans are paying these prices, are making difficult decisions because energy prices are up, food prices up, farmers are having a hard time ensuring that they're going to even be able to make a profit on their crops, which is going to mean even more problems for Americans. While all of that is happening in the economy, he's talking about a ballroom. He's showing
a ballroom.
Of a ballroom. I can't imagine in history, we've never seen this in history, that a president is engaged in a war, has major global chaos as a result of his actions that are hurting American families in a significant way. And he has time to talk about a ballroom. That's what he has time to talk about. He doesn't have time to talk about the economic challenges that American families are facing or the fact that we are in a war with Iran. He's talking about a ballroom. Talk about someone who's completely out of touch. That's Donald Trump.
Senator Gary Peters, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, as I said, Andrew Weissman will be joining us, but first, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse will join us next. Donald Trump's acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, previously served as Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer, a role where he won 34 guilty verdicts for Donald Trump for business fraud. If you watched how bad Todd Blanche was in that criminal trial in Manhattan, as I did, you could not be surprised by this completely inept exchange today in a Senate hearing in which Todd Blanche humiliated himself as a lawyer once again.
Has it ever happened that a sitting president sued his own government for $10 billion and then directed the settlement of the case and the establishment of a payout fund?
Not that I'm aware, but there's a lot of things that President Trump's the first of. No president had been indicted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Correct.
6, 7, 8 times either.
Correct. No president's been indicted.
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Whitehouse, there's nothing quite like a Todd Blanche appearance before the Senate.
You just got to love that he leads with, I serve a president who was indicted. What a great opener. In a hearing about a nearly $2 billion slush fund for cop beaters, announced literally the week after Police Week was celebrated here in Washington to recognize and respect the law enforcement presence that keeps us safe. So very next week, here they are with the cop beaters slush fund. And the other interesting piece about this, Lawrence, is that they managed to delay the news about the other part of the slush fund, this weasel deal that Todd Blanche negotiated for his personal client, the president, which is Trump family tax amnesty. And that news didn't break, even though it looks like it was signed before 8 in the morning that day. The news didn't get out until Blanche had scampered from the committee and didn't have to answer questions about that. But the twofer of a cop beaters slush fund the week after Police Week and Trump family tax amnesty from all audits and tax effects, it is pretty stunning stuff, and they've managed to hide all of that. And what it means for our Republican friends here in the Senate is like, how much Trump junk do you have to carry into this coming election? You've got the billionaire's ballroom. You've got the Iran war. You've got huge costs for diesel, fertilizer, fuel. You've got wicked climate hoax stuff. You've got a boozer running the FBI. I mean, how much do Republicans have to carry for this guy into the election? And frankly, does he want to drag the Republican Party down with him rather than fail alone as a collapsing president?
So on the tax piece, Donald Trump, in effect, pardoned himself for any possible tax crimes from this point backward. Apparently, as I read it, he could be investigated for tax fraud in the future, especially after his presidency. There is a Democratic-controlled Justice Department after his presidency. He would still be liable for future such investigations.
For new false tax filings and new tax fraud. But from this point back to the beginning of time, Trump, the Trump family, and the Trump corporate organizations all got a free pass, an amnesty for any tax fraud and any further tax audits. Remember, this is from the guy who promised when he first ran to release his taxes, and here we are all these years later, he still hasn't. And what they're almost certain to show is that, like many of the corrupt billionaires that are associated with Trump, he doesn't pay any taxes. He lets that, as Ms. Helmsley famously said, taxes are for the little people.
Well, he said in his first presidential campaign that, of course, he would release his tax returns as soon as the audit was complete. There was no evidence that an audit was going on at the time, but as soon as the audit was complete, well, now we know that the audit is complete as of tonight.
Got to be complete now. They're ended.
Yeah, and
we'll
what
see
is the damage?
Whether he produces any tax returns.
And this whole thing comes from the notion that Donald Trump was somehow damaged by having some small portion of his tax return released by a contractor who was working for the doing a job for the IRS, wasn't employed by the government. How is it damaging to a president to have tax returns released when every previous president, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, they've all released every page of their tax returns as president?
And when you have a self-dealing situation like this with Trump on both sides of the case, Trump as president, rather Trump as taxpayer versus Trump as president, with Trump as president settling in favor of Trump individually, you have you've got a huge process problem of where are the independent eyeballs to make a determination as to what the damages were. I mean, you've correctly pointed out that the damages are almost certainly zero, but there was also no independent eyeball put on this to show what the damages might actually have been. The whole thing was just a fix put in by his personal lawyer, this Weasley Blanche character who's running the Department of Justice right now. And as we close into November, Republicans are going to have to answer for this and so much more of the nonstop Trump corruption.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining our coverage tonight.
Thank you, Lars.
Andrew Weissman is going to join us in the next segment, where he will actually have some possible solutions to this Trump madness. But first, it is election night with primaries in multiple states, and we're waiting for some important results in Georgia involving Supreme Court elections there. And joining us now is MS Now's Ali Velshi with the latest. Ali, what do we know?
Well, I got some breaking news for you before we get to the Supreme Court. The Associated Press has just declared that Keisha Lance Bottoms will be the Democratic candidate for the Senate. 66% of the vote is in. She's leading with 57.7% against her nearest competitor at 16.6%. You know what's interesting about this is this is for the governor race in Georgia. What's interesting about this is that Keisha Lance Bottoms was the mayor of Atlanta. Fulton County polls are not in yet. They will not come in until about 11:04 this evening. There was a shooting earlier in Fulton County, so they delayed voting for 4 hours. So we will get all of that. You would imagine that the majority of the vote would go over to Keisha Lance Bottoms, so that's why they're able to make that call. However, there's another thing you were just talking about that's interesting. This is a state Supreme Court election in Georgia. There are two seats right now. It's nonpartisan, meaning there isn't an R or a D next to the candidate. In one of the races, 70% of the vote is in, and the right-leaning candidate, the conservative candidate, who's the incumbent, Sarah Warren, has been declared the winner there with 61 to 38. The spread is about 340,000 voters. Here's the interesting thing. The other race has not been called yet. Now, let me tell you why that's interesting. This is the conservative candidate who is the incumbent is Charles Bethel. The challenger is Miracle Rankin. At the moment, there's 105,000 votes separating them. Why has this one not been called yet? That's because the same issue. Fulton County, which is the most populous county in the state, and it's most of Atlanta, has not come in yet. That will come in at literally 2 minutes after 11 this evening. That comes in, and there's a sense that there's more than 250,000 votes in Fulton County. That will change and probably erase this lead. The vote percentage will increase dramatically, and it is quite likely that Miracle Rankin will take the lead. So this is a very interesting story here, in that it's almost a split ticket on the same position for the Georgia Supreme Court. So where there's been a lot of Donald Trump and his people winning tonight, there may be a very different story in Georgia.
Yeah, that's an important race. Ali Velshi, thank you very much for joining us. And coming up, Andrew Weissman joins us next, and he has some ideas about how to deal with what.
Okay, y'all, good night. I'm off to sleep. Good night. Thank you.